They say money can't buy love, but it can buy death. In the gleaming towers of Manhattan, where billion-dollar empires rise and fall with a handshake, some secrets are worth killing for, where trust becomes betrayal, where the people sworn to heal become executioners. She was supposed to disappear quietly. Another tragic medical complication. Another grieving widower free to start fresh. But they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated a mother's love. When you have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for, when the system is rigged and the deck is stacked against you, sometimes the only justice is the kind you take for yourself. This is the story of how a broken woman became an unstoppable force, how betrayal became fuel, how a victim became a warrior, and how one private jet would become the symbol of the most spectacular revenge the billionaire class had ever seen. Some battles are fought in boardrooms, others are fought in courtrooms. This one was fought for survival. The perfect life that hid a deadly secret. The morning sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling penthouse. 50 floors above the bustling streets of Manhattan, Isabella Rodriguez Sterling stood on the marble terrace, her hand gently caressing her 6-month pregnant belly as she gazed out at Central Park below. The autumn breeze carried the scent of changing leaves, and for a moment, everything felt perfect in her world. At 28, Isabella had traded her promising career as an MIT-trained architect for what she believed was the love of a lifetime. 3 years ago, Alexander Sterling had swept her off her feet with private jets, 5-star restaurants, and promises of a fairy tale future. The $30 million penthouse they now called home was a testament to his success as CEO of Sterling Tech Empire, a conglomerate worth $5 billion. Mrs. Sterling, your prenatal vitamins, said Maria, their housekeeper, approaching with a silver tray containing an array of supplements and fresh squeezed orange juice. Thank you, Maria, Isabella smiled, accepting the glass. Has Mr. Sterling left for the office already? Yes, ma'am. He said he'll be in meetings all day and might not return until late evening. Isabella nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her face. Lately, Alexander had been increasingly distant, claiming that a major merger required his full attention. Their conversations had dwindled to brief exchanges about schedules and social obligations. Still, she attributed it to the stress of business and the anticipation of becoming new parents. The penthouse itself was a masterpiece of modern luxury. Italian marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's annual salaries. The walls displayed an impressive collection of contemporary art, including 2 Picassos and a Monet that Alexander had purchased at auction for $12 million. Every piece of furniture was custom-made, from the silk-upholstered sofas to the dining table crafted from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood. Isabella made her way to the nursery, where she'd been spending most of her time lately. The room was a vision in soft pastels, with hand-painted murals of fairy tale scenes covering the walls. A French antique crib sat in the center, surrounded by toys from the finest boutiques in Europe. She ran her fingers along the silk curtains, imagining the day she would hold her baby in this beautiful space. Soon, little one, she whispered to her belly. Soon you'll be here, and we'll be a real family. But fate had other plans brewing in the shadows of Manhattan's medical elite. 3 blocks away, at the prestigious Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital, Dr. Victoria Blackwood was finishing her morning rounds in the maternity ward. At 35, she was considered one of the finest obstetricians in the city, with a patient list that read like a who's who of New York society. Her beauty was striking. Raven black hair pulled into a perfect chignon, emerald eyes that could charm or calculate with equal ease, and a figure that turned heads in hospital corridors. What her patients didn't know was that Dr. Blackwood had been conducting a very different kind of relationship with Alexander Sterling for the past 2 years. Their affair had begun at a medical charity gala, where Alexander had been particularly generous with his donations, and his attention to the beautiful doctor who had thanked him privately afterward. Victoria, Alexander's voice came through her private cell phone as she stepped into her office. We need to talk. Not over the phone, she replied coolly, glancing around to ensure she wasn't overheard. Your wife has an appointment next week. We can discuss things then. Isabella suspects nothing. Of course not. She trusts me completely. All of your precious society wives do. Victoria's laugh held no warmth. They have no idea what's really going on. Alexander Sterling was indeed a man who got what he wanted, and what he wanted now was freedom from his marriage, along with the entirety of his fortune intact. Isabella's pregnancy had initially seemed like a blessing, but as the months progressed, he'd begun to view it as an inconvenience. His prenuptial agreement was ironclad, but a child would complicate matters significantly. The plan needs to move forward, Alexander said quietly. I've already transferred the first payment to the offshore account we discussed. 500,000, as agreed, Victoria confirmed. And you understand that once this begins, there's no turning back. I understand perfectly. Just make it look natural. Complications happen all the time in high-risk pregnancies. Dr. Victoria Blackwood smiled as she ended the call. She'd been planning this moment for months, ever since Alexander had promised her $50 million as a wedding gift once he was free to marry her. The beautiful doctor had expensive tastes and even more expensive ambitions. Becoming Mrs. Alexander Sterling would give her everything she'd ever wanted: wealth, status, and power beyond imagination. What neither of them knew was that their carefully laid plans would soon unravel in the most spectacular way possible. The storm came without warning on a rain-soaked October afternoon. Isabella had been arranging flowers in the penthouse when the first pain struck, a sharp cramping that doubled her over. At first, she thought it was just the baby moving, but when she saw the blood, panic set in. Alexander, she called, frantically dialing his number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before his irritated voice answered. What is it? Isabella, I'm in the middle of a crucial presentation. The baby, something's wrong. I'm bleeding. And the pain. Her voice cracked with fear. Can't you handle this yourself? Call a car to the hospital. I'll meet you there when I can. The line went dead. Isabella stared at her phone in disbelief, then clutched her stomach as another wave of pain washed over her. With shaking hands, she called 911. The ambulance ride to Manhattan Presbyterian felt like a nightmare. Isabella lay on the gurney, one hand on her belly, the other gripping her phone as she tried repeatedly to reach Alexander. Each call went straight to voicemail. We're here, ma'am, the paramedic said gently as they pulled up to the hospital's emergency entrance. Dr. Blackwood is waiting for you. She's one of the best. If only Isabella had known the truth. Dr. Victoria Blackwood greeted her with the perfect mask of professional concern. Isabella, don't worry. We're going to take excellent care of you and your baby. Her smile was reassuring, her voice warm and confident. Behind her eyes, however, calculations were already in motion. Where's Alexander? Isabella gasped as they wheeled her into the examination room. I'm sure he'll be here soon, Victoria replied smoothly. Right now, let's focus on you. I need to run some tests to see what's causing the bleeding. The next 3 hours were a blur of medical procedures, urgent consultations, and growing fear. Isabella's condition was serious. Placental abruption, Victoria announced gravely. The baby was in distress, and immediate intervention was required. We need to perform an emergency cesarean, Victoria explained, her face a mask of professional concern. There are risks, of course, but it's the only way to save both you and your child. Please, Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face. Save my baby. Please. What Isabella didn't know was that while she was being prepped for surgery, Dr. Blackwood was making a very different kind of call. It's beginning, Victoria spoke quietly into her phone, standing in a secluded corner of the hospital corridor. The surgery will take place in an hour. After that, we'll see how things develop. Alexander's voice was cold on the other end. You know what needs to be done. I trust your medical expertise completely. Of course, complications can arise during any surgery, and infections afterward. Well, these things happen, especially when proper protocols aren't followed. The surgery itself was a masterpiece of deception. Dr. Blackwood saved baby Lucas, for now, while deliberately creating conditions that would lead to serious complications for Isabella. A tiny nick in the wrong place, a moment's delay in closing a critical blood vessel, the introduction of bacteria where there should have been sterile procedure. When Isabella woke up in recovery, holding her tiny son for the first time, she had no idea that her body was already fighting a battle it had been designed to lose. "He's beautiful," she whispered, tears of joy mixing with the exhaustion and pain. "Where's Alexander? I need to call him." "He's been informed," Victoria lied smoothly. "He said he'll be here as soon as possible. Right now, you need to rest. The next few days will be critical for your recovery." Critical indeed. Victoria had ensured that Isabella would develop a severe post-operative infection, one that would require multiple additional surgeries and extended hospital stays. Each procedure would add hundreds of thousands of dollars to the medical bills, bills that Alexander had no intention of paying, but the most devastating betrayal was yet to come. On Isabella's fifth day in the hospital, weakened by infection and fighting for her life, she overheard a conversation that shattered her world. Through her morphine-induced haze, she heard familiar voices in the corridor outside her room. "The infection is progressing nicely," came Victoria's voice, clinical and detached. "She'll need at least 3 more surgeries. I estimate the total bill will reach 2.3 million. "Perfect," Alexander's voice replied, and Isabella's heart stopped. "Have you made sure my name isn't on any of the financial documents?" "Of course. Everything is in her name only. When she dies from complications, the hospital will write it off as a tragic loss, and you'll be free to marry me, just as we planned." Isabella's blood ran cold. Through the crack in the door, she could see her husband, the man she trusted with her life, the father of her newborn son, embracing another woman. The woman who was supposed to be saving her life was actually orchestrating her death. "What about the baby?" Victoria asked. "Orphanages exist for a reason," Alexander replied callously. "I never wanted children anyway. They're just expensive complications." With trembling hands, Isabella reached for her phone. Her fingers shook as she pressed record, capturing every word of their conversation. She didn't know how she would use this evidence, but something deep inside her, the survival instinct of a mother protecting her child, told her to preserve it. "I love you, Victoria," Alexander's voice continued, clear and damning. "After Isabella is gone, we'll have everything we ever wanted. The $5 billion empire, the houses, the jets, the freedom to live as we choose. And I love you too, darling. $50 million will make a lovely wedding gift." Isabella closed her eyes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. The man she'd married, the father of her child, had just signed her death warrant. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the fierce determination of a mother who would do anything to protect her son. 3 weeks later, when Isabella was finally discharged with baby Lucas, the first shock came in the form of a bill for $2.3 million. The second shock came when she discovered that their joint bank accounts had been frozen, and she had no access to any of Alexander's assets. The third shock was waiting for her when she returned to the penthouse, only to find the locks had been changed and her belongings thrown into garbage bags on the sidewalk. Standing in the rain, holding her newborn son, Isabella Rodriguez Sterling realized that her fairy tale marriage had been nothing more than an elaborate trap. But she also realized something else. She was stronger than she'd ever known. And this was far from over. As she picked up one of the garbage bags containing the remnants of her old life, her fingers found a small device she'd forgotten about, a digital recorder she'd used for architecture school. In that moment, Isabella smiled for the first time in weeks. Alexander and Victoria had made a fatal error. They'd assumed that a broken, desperate woman would simply disappear quietly into the night. They had no idea they were about to face the fury of a mother who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The game was just beginning. When the golden cage becomes a battlefield. The studio apartment in Queens was a far cry from the Manhattan penthouse. 400 square feet of cracked walls, a radiator that clanged through the night, and the constant rumble of subway trains beneath her feet. Isabella sat on the second-hand mattress she'd bought for $50, nursing Lucas while tears streamed down her face. 3 months had passed since that devastating night when her world collapsed. 3 months of working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads and formula in Lucas's bottle. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were now cracked and calloused from washing dishes at an all-night diner, cleaning office buildings before dawn, and taking on freelance design work whenever she could find it. The stack of medical bills on her makeshift desk had grown to insurmountable proportions. $2.3 million, plus interest and penalties that added $50,000 more each month. The hospital's collection agency called daily with increasingly threatening demands. They'd already filed a lawsuit, and Isabella knew it was only a matter of time before they garnished what little income she had. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered to Lucas, who was now 4 months old and the only light in her darkening world. "Mommy's going to figure this out, I promise." But how could she fight a system designed to protect the wealthy? How could a woman with $3 in her checking account take on a billionaire with unlimited resources? The answer came from an unexpected source. Isabella's lowest point came on a frigid December morning when she was cleaning offices in the Sterling Tech building. It was cruel irony that the only job she could find with flexible hours happened to be in her ex-husband's empire. She worked the 4 a.m. shift, long before any executives arrived, invisible among the army of cleaners who maintained the gleaming corporate facade. She was emptying trash bins on the executive floor when she heard voices from Alexander's corner office. The door was slightly ajar, and Isabella froze when she recognized her ex-husband's voice. "The lawyer says Isabella is completely isolated," Alexander was saying into his phone. "No family, no money, no resources. The lawsuit from the hospital will finish her off within 6 months." Isabella crept closer, her heart pounding. She pulled out her old phone and pressed record. "What about the child?" came a voice she didn't recognize. "Dead weight," Alexander replied coldly. "Once Isabella's gone, I'll have the state take custody. The kid will disappear into the foster system, and I'll be free and clear. No loose ends, no complications." And Dr. Blackwood, "Victoria's already started making arrangements for our wedding. She's proven herself quite resourceful. Did you know she's done this before? 3 other wives of wealthy men, all dead from mysterious medical complications. She's building quite a reputation in certain circles." Isabella's blood ran cold. Victoria wasn't just a corrupt doctor. She was a serial killer who specialized in eliminating inconvenient wives for wealthy men. And Isabella was her latest target. "The beauty of it is that no one suspects a thing," Alexander continued. "Victoria has hospital administrators in her pocket, coroners who ask no questions, and a track record that makes her look like a tragic healer who just happens to lose patients to rare complications." Isabella backed away from the door, her mind reeling. She had evidence now, concrete proof of conspiracy and murder. But what could she do with it? Who would believe a desperate woman with no money against a billionaire and a respected doctor? That's when she remembered the online forum that had been her lifeline during the darkest weeks, a support group for single mothers facing impossible odds. One member, who went by the username Legal Eagle 47, had repeatedly offered help to women fighting powerful ex-husbands. Marcus Chen was not what Isabella had expected. At 38, the Chinese-American lawyer worked out of a cramped office above a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown, far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan's prestigious law firms. But his track record spoke for itself. 18 victories against billionaire defendants in the past 5 years, with a particular expertise in cases involving medical malpractice and spousal abuse. "My parents were immigrants," Marcus explained as Isabella sat across from his cluttered desk, Lucas sleeping in her arms. "They worked 16-hour days in a garment factory so I could go to law school. I've seen what happens when the powerful prey on the powerless. That's why I do this. Isabella played the recording she'd captured, watching Marcus's expression grow darker with each word. When Alexander's voice described the plan to disappear Lucas into foster care, Marcus's jaw tightened. "This is conspiracy to commit murder," he said quietly. "And if this Dr. Blackwood has killed other women—" "You believe me?" Isabella asked, hardly daring to hope. "I believe evidence," Marcus replied. "And this recording is just the beginning. But I need to warn you, going up against Alexander Sterling won't be easy. He has unlimited resources, connections throughout the legal system, and no moral boundaries. Are you prepared for the fight of your life?" Isabella looked down at Lucas, sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely dependent on her for protection. "I'm prepared for anything." "Good, because we're going to need help. I know someone who can dig deeper into Sterling's operations, and Dr. Blackwood's past victims." That someone turned out to be Jessica Wong, a brilliant hacker who'd once worked for Sterling Tech before being fired for discovering security vulnerabilities that Alexander didn't want to acknowledge. At 26, Jessica was bitter, brilliant, and eager for revenge against her former employer. "I've been waiting 3 years for a chance like this," Jessica told them during their first meeting in Marcus's office. "Sterling destroyed my career and blacklisted me from every tech company in the city. Time for payback." What Jessica uncovered in the following weeks was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Dr. Victoria Blackwood wasn't just a corrupt doctor. She was the head of a sophisticated murder-for-hire operation that specialized in eliminating wealthy men's wives through medical accidents. "Look at this," Jessica said, her laptop screen displaying a complex web of financial transactions. "Victoria has received payments from 12 different wealthy men over the past 5 years. Each payment was followed by the death of their wives from rare medical complications." The evidence was overwhelming. Email chains between Victoria and her clients, discussing treatment plans and unfortunate outcomes. Bank records showing payments disguised as charitable donations to medical research. Even video footage from hospital security cameras showing Victoria deliberately contaminating surgical instruments. "She's a monster," Isabella whispered, staring at photographs of the other victims. Women who looked just like her, young wives who trusted the wrong doctor with their lives. "She's a businesswoman," Marcus corrected grimly. "This is organized crime at the highest level, protected by money and medical credentials. But we have something she doesn't expect: evidence, and the testimony of a survivor." The most damning discovery came when Jessica hacked into Alexander's personal computer and found a detailed project file labeled Operation Clean Slate, a step-by-step plan for eliminating Isabella and Lucas. With a budget of $2 million and a timeline extending 6 months beyond Isabella's expected death. "He's been planning this for over a year," Jessica revealed, scrolling through documents that made Isabella's blood run cold. "Look at this. He even has a backup plan involving a hired assassin if the medical route fails." Isabella stared at the screen, seeing her own death planned out with corporate efficiency. But instead of despair, she felt something else rising within her, a cold, focused rage that would fuel her through the battle ahead. "What do we do now?" she asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Now we go to war." The safe house in upstate New York was a modest cabin surrounded by pine trees and protected by a security system that Jessica had personally designed. For the first time in months, Isabella could breathe without looking over her shoulder, knowing that Lucas was safe while they prepared their case. But even in this peaceful setting, the weight of what lay ahead was overwhelming. Isabella spent her days going over evidence with Marcus, learning legal terminology and court procedures, preparing for the moment when she would face Alexander and Victoria in front of a jury. "The key is to stay calm," Marcus coached her during one of their practice sessions. "Sterling's lawyers will try to paint you as a desperate woman making wild accusations. They'll attack your credibility, your mental state, your fitness as a mother. You need to be unshakable." "I can do this," Isabella said, though her voice trembled slightly. For Lucas, I can do anything. The breakthrough came when Jessica made contact with Dr. Patricia Reeves, a former colleague of Victoria's who'd been suspicious about the unusual number of patient deaths in Victoria's care. Dr. Reeves had kept detailed records of her concerns, including medical evidence that Victoria had deliberately caused infections and complications. I've been waiting for someone to listen, Dr. Reeves told them during a clandestine meeting. Victoria has hospital administrators terrified to speak out. She's brought in millions in donations from grateful wealthy widowers. But I know what she's really doing. With Dr. Reeves's testimony and medical evidence, combined with Jessica's digital discoveries and Isabella's recordings, they finally had a case strong enough to take down both Alexander and Victoria. But their enemies weren't going to surrender without a fight. The first attack came on a snowy February night when Isabella was returning to the safe house after a day of case preparation in the city. Two black SUVs forced her car off the road, and she found herself surrounded by men in expensive suits who looked more like Wall Street executives than common criminals. Mrs. Sterling, the lead man said politely, my employer would like to have a conversation with you. He's prepared to offer a very generous settlement to resolve this misunderstanding. Isabella's hand was already on her phone, ready to call 911. I'm not interested in any settlement. $10 million, the man continued calmly. Enough to disappear somewhere nice. Start a new life. All you have to do is withdraw your allegations and sign a non-disclosure agreement. And if I refuse, the man's smile never wavered. Accidents happen. Mrs. Sterling, single mothers face so many dangers. It would be tragic if something happened to you or your son. Isabella thought of Lucas, safe in the cabin with the bodyguard Marcus had insisted on hiring. You can tell Alexander that I'm not the same woman he married. I'm not afraid anymore. The man nodded as if he'd expected that response. We'll be in touch. As the SUVs drove away, Isabella realized that Alexander was more desperate than they'd thought, which meant their evidence was even more damaging than they'd hoped. The war was escalating, but Isabella was ready for battle. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, Alexander himself. In his arrogance, he'd begun planning his wedding to Victoria, convinced that Isabella would be dead or silenced long before any legal proceedings could threaten him. Jessica intercepted the wedding planning emails, which included guest lists of Manhattan's elite and detailed discussions about how to handle any remaining loose ends from Alexander's previous marriage. Most damning of all was an email from Victoria discussing her final treatment for Isabella, a lethal injection disguised as a routine vaccination that would cause cardiac arrest within hours. They're planning to kill you at Lucas's 6-month checkup, Marcus told Isabella, his face pale as he read the email. Victoria has scheduled the appointment herself. She's going to inject you with something that will stop your heart, then claim you had an undiagnosed heart condition triggered by postpartum stress. Isabella stared at the email, seeing her death sentence typed out in clinical language. But instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of calm. They had everything they needed now. It was time to turn the hunters into the hunted. When is the trial scheduled? She asked. 2 weeks from today, Judge Patricia Hawthorne, Manhattan Supreme Court. She's got a reputation for not being impressed by wealth or status. Isabella smiled, thinking of all the women Victoria had murdered, all the families destroyed by Alexander's greed. 2 weeks to prepare for the performance of my life. This isn't a performance, Isabella. This is justice. Then let's make sure justice wins. As Isabella prepared for the battle that would determine not just her future, but the future of every woman who might become Victoria's next victim, she thought about the frightened, naive girl who'd married Alexander Sterling 3 years ago. That girl was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to fight back harder than your enemies ever expected. The courtroom was waiting, and Isabella Rodriguez Sterling was ready to take back everything that had been stolen from her. When justice finally comes to call, the morning of March 15th dawned crisp and clear over Manhattan, as if the universe itself was preparing for the day when justice would finally be served. Isabella stood before the mirror in her small Queens apartment, adjusting the simple black dress she'd bought at a secondhand store. It wasn't the designer gowns she'd once worn to charity galas, but it represented something far more powerful, the transformation of a victim into a warrior. Lucas, now 6 months old, gurgled happily in his carrier as Isabella prepared for the most important day of her life. She kissed his forehead gently, whispering, "Today, baby boy, Mommy's going to make sure you never have to be afraid again." Marcus Chen arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, his usually rumpled appearance replaced by a crisp navy suit that meant business. "Ready for this?" he asked, though he could see the determination burning in Isabella's eyes. "I've been ready since the day they tried to kill me," she replied. The ride to Manhattan Supreme Court was a journey through Isabella's past. They passed the Sterling Tech building, where she'd discovered the truth, the hospital where Victoria had tried to murder her, and finally the courthouse where her future would be decided. Outside the imposing granite steps, media vans lined the street like a small army. News of the case had leaked 3 days earlier, and the story of a poor single mother taking on a billionaire had captured the city's imagination. Signs reading "Justice for Isabella" and "No More Dead Wives" waved above a crowd of supporters, many of them women who'd faced their own battles against powerful men. "Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling." Reporters shouted questions as Isabella made her way up the courthouse steps, but she kept her eyes forward, Lucas secure in her arms. This wasn't about publicity. This was about survival. Inside courtroom 12, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. On one side sat Alexander Sterling in a $15,000 Armani suit, flanked by 6 lawyers from Morrison & Associates, the most expensive legal firm in Manhattan. His confidence was palpable, the confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle that mattered. Dr. Victoria Blackwood sat beside him, her beauty undimmed by the serious charges against her. She wore a conservative blue suit that made her look like the respected medical professional she pretended to be. Her hands folded calmly as if attending a routine medical conference rather than fighting for her freedom. On the other side, Isabella sat with Marcus Chen and a single assistant, David Park, a young lawyer working his first major case. The disparity in resources was obvious to everyone in the courtroom, but Isabella had learned that sometimes David really could defeat Goliath. Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered the courtroom with the bearing of someone who'd seen every kind of legal battle imaginable. At 62, she had a reputation for running a no-nonsense courtroom where wealth and connections meant nothing. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, and her steel blue eyes missed nothing as she surveyed the packed courtroom. "This court is now in session," she announced. "We are here today for the criminal trial of Alexander Sterling and Dr. Victoria Blackwood, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, medical malpractice, and fraud. Counselor Chen, you may proceed with your opening statement." Marcus rose slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle over the courtroom. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today because two people who swore oaths to protect and heal, conspired to murder an innocent woman and her newborn child for money. Not for passion, not in a moment of rage, but as a cold, calculated business transaction." He walked to the center of the courtroom, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You will hear evidence that Dr. Victoria Blackwood, a respected physician, deliberately infected Isabella Sterling during surgery, causing life-threatening complications. You will hear evidence that Alexander Sterling, the defendant's husband, paid Dr. Blackwood $500,000 to ensure his wife would not survive childbirth." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several jurors looked shocked, while others leaned forward with interest. "But perhaps most horrifically," Marcus continued, "you will learn that this was not an isolated incident. Dr. Blackwood has been paid by wealthy men to murder their wives for years, using her medical credentials as cover for what amounts to a serial killing spree. Alexander's lead attorney, James Morrison, immediately stood up. Objection. Your Honor, counsel is making inflammatory statements not supported by evidence. Overruled, Judge Hawthorne said calmly. This is an opening statement. Continue. Counselor Chen. Marcus nodded. The evidence will show that Isabella Sterling is alive today, not because of mercy from these defendants, but because they underestimated the strength of a mother's love and the power of truth. Thank you. Morrison's opening statement was exactly what Isabella had expected. A character assassination disguised as legal defense. He painted her as a desperate woman making wild accusations to extort money from her wealthy ex-husband. He described Alexander as a generous philanthropist being victimized by a vindictive former spouse. But Isabella noticed something important. Morrison never directly addressed the evidence. He focused on emotion and character, which told her that he knew the facts were not on his side. The first witness was Dr. Patricia Reeves, Victoria's former colleague who'd kept detailed records of her suspicions. Under Marcus's careful questioning, she painted a picture of a respected hospital being infiltrated by a methodical killer. In my 23 years as a physician, Dr. Reeves testified, I have never seen a doctor with such a high rate of maternal mortality. In 5 years, Dr. Blackwood lost 12 patients to post-surgical complications, all wealthy women whose husbands remarried within 18 months. Did you report your concerns to hospital administration? Marcus asked. Multiple times, but Dr. Blackwood brought in significant donations from grateful widowers. The hospital was unwilling to investigate their most profitable physician. Morrison's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. Dr. Reeves had documented everything meticulously, and her testimony stood firm under pressure. The second witness was Jessica Wong, who presented the digital evidence with devastating precision. The jury watched in stunned silence as she displayed emails between Alexander and Victoria discussing Isabella's treatment plan and expected outcomes. This email, dated 6 weeks before Mrs. Sterling's surgery, Jessica testified, shows Mr. Sterling asking Dr. Blackwood about her success rate with previous cases involving complicated family situations. And Dr. Blackwood's response, Marcus prompted. She wrote, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. No complications survive my procedures. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Morrison seemed shaken by the coldness of the evidence. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus played the recording Isabella had captured outside Alexander's office. The jury heard her ex-husband's voice, clear and damning, discussing plans to disappear Lucas into the foster system and describing Victoria's history of murdering inconvenient wives. I love you, Victoria. Alexander's recorded voice echoed through the courtroom. After Isabella is gone, we'll have everything we ever wanted. Isabella watched the jury's faces as they heard her death sentence being pronounced so casually. She saw shock, disgust, and growing anger. These 12 ordinary people were beginning to understand the true scope of the conspiracy they were witnessing. When it came time for Isabella to testify, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. News crews waited outside for any word from inside, and social media was buzzing with "Re or Justice for Isabella" hashtags. Isabella walked to the witness stand carrying Lucas, who had become a powerful symbol of innocence, threatened by unthinkable evil. Judge Hawthorne had allowed the baby to remain with his mother, understanding that separating them would be needlessly cruel. Mrs. Sterling, Marcus began gently, please tell the jury about your marriage to Alexander Sterling. Isabella's voice was steady and clear as she described the fairy tale courtship, the luxury of their early marriage, and the gradual realization that she'd married a monster. She spoke about Alexander's increasing coldness, his control over their finances, and his reaction when she needed emergency medical care. When I called him from the hospital, bleeding and terrified, he told me to handle it myself, Isabella testified. He said he was too busy to be bothered with my problems. And when you discovered the conspiracy between your husband and Dr. Blackwood, Isabella's voice grew stronger, more confident. I realized that everything I'd believed about my marriage was a lie. Alexander never loved me. I was just an asset to be disposed of when I became inconvenient. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal, exactly as Marcus had warned. He attacked every aspect of Isabella's character, her mental state, her motivations. But Isabella had prepared for this moment, and she refused to be intimidated. Isn't it true, Mrs. Sterling, that you're making these accusations because you're angry about your divorce settlement? Mr. Morrison, Isabella replied calmly, I would gladly live in poverty for the rest of my life if it meant my son would have a father who loved him instead of one who planned to abandon him in an orphanage. You claim to have this recording of my client, but isn't it possible you fabricated it using modern technology? Isabella smiled slightly. The FBI's audio analysis confirmed the recording's authenticity, but more importantly, the recording led us to discover evidence of Dr. Blackwood's other victims. 3 women who died under suspicious circumstances after their husbands paid Dr. Blackwood exactly the same amount Alexander paid her. Morrison pressed on, but Isabella was unshakable. Every attack only made her appear more sympathetic to the jury, more like the victim of a terrible conspiracy rather than the vindictive ex-wife Morrison was trying to portray. The defense's case was weak and everyone knew it. Alexander took the stand and claimed the recordings were taken out of context, that his payments to Victoria were legitimate medical consulting fees, and that his comments about Isabella were made in anger during their contentious divorce proceedings. But under Marcus's cross-examination, Alexander's composure cracked. The billionaire who'd commanded boardrooms and dominated business rivals found himself unable to explain away the mountain of evidence against him. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, displaying bank records on the courtroom screens. Can you explain why you paid Dr. Blackwood $500,000 2 days before your wife's surgery, then an additional $200,000 after her complications began? Those were charitable donations to her research foundation. What research was Dr. Blackwood conducting that required such large donations? Alexander stammered, unable to provide a coherent answer. The man who'd once seemed untouchable now appeared small and desperate before the jury. Victoria's testimony was even more disastrous. Her attempts to maintain her professional composure came across as cold and calculating. When Marcus presented evidence of her other victims, she claimed they were all tragic coincidences. Dr. Blackwood, Marcus said, in your 5-year career at Manhattan Presbyterian, you've had 12 maternal deaths. The hospital average for similar cases is 0.3%. How do you explain this discrepancy? Medicine is not an exact science, Victoria replied stiffly. Complications arise. Complications that only seem to arise when the patient's husband has paid you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Morrison objected, but the damage was done. Victoria's mask of professional competence had slipped, revealing the cold killer underneath. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Marcus presented evidence that neither the defense nor the media had expected. FBI surveillance footage of Victoria meeting with other wealthy men to discuss removing obstacles to their happiness. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Marcus announced, the FBI has been investigating Dr. Blackwood for the past 18 months. What you're about to see is surveillance footage of her meeting with Robert Caldwell, whose wife died of mysterious complications 3 months before Isabella Sterling's surgery. The footage showed Victoria in a private dining room at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant, clearly discussing business with a man whose wife had died under her care. Audio enhancement revealed her saying, "The infection method works best. It looks completely natural, and no one questions a doctor's treatment decisions." The courtroom erupted. Even Judge Hawthorne looked shaken by the evidence of such calculated evil. Alexander Sterling's face went white as he realized the full scope of Victoria's operations and his own involvement in them. Closing arguments took place on a Friday afternoon, with the courthouse surrounded by protesters, media, and supporters from around the country. The case had become a symbol of something larger, the fight between ordinary people and the wealthy elite who believed they were above the law. Morrison's closing argument was a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt, but the evidence was overwhelming. He argued that Isabella was a disturbed woman seeking revenge, but couldn't explain away the recordings, the financial evidence, or the testimony of other victims' families who'd come forward during the trial. Marcus's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal oratory, summarizing weeks of evidence into a compelling narrative of greed, betrayal, and justice. Ladies and gentlemen, he concluded, Isabella Sterling sits before you today not because she's seeking money or revenge, but because she refuses to let her son grow up in a world where the wealthy can murder the innocent without consequences. Your verdict will determine not just her future, but the future of every woman who might become Dr. Blackwood's next victim. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to deliver the verdict that would change everything. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant, Alexander Sterling, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant, Dr. Victoria Blackwood, guilty. The courtroom exploded in cheers and applause. Isabella collapsed in tears, clutching Lucas as the weight of months of fear and uncertainty finally lifted from her shoulders. Alexander Sterling, the billionaire who'd believed he could buy his way out of any problem, sat in stunned silence as his world crumbled around him. Judge Hawthorne sentenced Alexander to 25 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $500 million in damages to Isabella. Victoria received life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of 5 women, with additional charges pending in other jurisdictions. But perhaps most importantly, the judge ordered the immediate transfer of all Alexander's assets, including his beloved Gulfstream G650 private jet, to Isabella, ensuring that she would never again be vulnerable to the kind of attack that had nearly destroyed her. As Isabella walked down the courthouse steps, holding Lucas and flanked by Marcus and Jessica, she felt the first moments of true peace she'd experienced in over a year. The nightmare was over. Justice had won, but her story was just beginning. When the phoenix rises from the ashes, 6 months after the trial that shocked the world, Isabella Rodriguez Sterling stood on the tarmac at JFK Airport, watching as her private jet, the same Gulfstream G650 that Alexander had once used for his business empire, was loaded with medical supplies bound for earthquake victims in Guatemala. The irony wasn't lost on her. The symbol of her ex-husband's greed had become an instrument of healing and hope. The field hospital equipment is secure, Dr. Sarah Martinez reported, clipboard in hand. Sarah was the director of the Isabella Foundation's mobile medical unit, a team of volunteer doctors and nurses who traveled to disaster zones around the world. We should reach Guatemala City by evening, Isabella nodded, adjusting Lucas in her arms. At 1 year old, her son was a happy, healthy boy who would never know the poverty and fear that had defined his earliest months. More importantly, he would grow up in a world where his mother had proven that justice could triumph over wealth and power. The foundation Isabella had created with her court settlement had already changed thousands of lives. Beyond the mobile medical units, they'd opened 15 legal aid centers across the United States, providing free representation to women fighting powerful abusers. They'd funded 3 emergency shelters for domestic violence victims and established a scholarship program for single mothers pursuing legal or medical careers. Mrs. Torres, Sarah asked, using Isabella's new married name. Are you ready for takeoff? Isabella smiled at the sound of her new name. 6 months earlier, she'd married Dr. Michael Torres, the pediatric surgeon who'd volunteered with her foundation and slowly won her heart. Their wedding had been a small ceremony in Harlem, attended by the women Isabella had helped through her legal aid centers, a celebration of new beginnings rather than a display of wealth. Michael emerged from the jet's cabin, carrying a medical bag and wearing the blue scrubs that had become his uniform for their humanitarian missions. At 35, he was everything Alexander had never been: compassionate, humble, and completely devoted to helping others. His love for Isabella had nothing to do with her newfound wealth and everything to do with the strength and courage she'd shown in fighting for justice. "Lucas is getting excited about flying," Michael said, ruffling the boy's hair. Lucas had taken to calling him Daddy within weeks of their marriage, never knowing any father figure other than this gentle man who read him bedtime stories and taught him Spanish lullabies. "He's a natural traveler," Isabella laughed. Unlike his mother the first time she stepped on a private jet, it was hard to believe that just 2 years earlier, she'd been a desperate woman living in a studio apartment, working 3 jobs to survive. Now she commanded resources that would have been unimaginable in her previous life. But more importantly, she'd learned to use those resources for something meaningful. The transformation of Isabella's life had been remarkable, but it was the transformation of others that truly mattered to her. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the brave physician who testified against Victoria Blackwood, had been appointed as the new chief of obstetrics at Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital. Her first act had been to implement new oversight procedures that would prevent another Victoria from using medical credentials to commit murder. Marcus Chen had been honored by the American Bar Association as Attorney of the Year and had joined the Isabella Foundation as its chief legal counsel. His small office above the dim sum restaurant had been replaced by a state-of-the-art legal center that handled over 1,000 cases annually, all funded by Isabella's settlement. Jessica Wong had parlayed her hacking skills and courtroom testimony into a lucrative cybersecurity consulting business. She still worked with Isabella's foundation, using her technical expertise to track down other networks of corrupt professionals who preyed on vulnerable women. Even more satisfying was the broader impact the case had created. The Sterling effect, as legal scholars had termed it, had led to investigations of suspicious medical deaths across the country. 3 other doctors had been arrested for similar schemes, and new federal legislation required enhanced oversight of physicians treating wealthy patients in contentious divorce proceedings. But perhaps the most powerful change was in the hundreds of women who'd found the courage to speak out against their own abusers after seeing Isabella's victory. The Foundation's legal aid centers were flooded with cases from women who'd previously felt powerless against wealthy, connected husbands. As the Gulfstream lifted off from JFK, Isabella settled into the leather seat that had once symbolized Alexander's dominance and arrogance. The jet's interior had been completely redesigned. The gaudy gold fixtures replaced with functional medical equipment storage, the bar converted into a pharmacy, and the entertainment system updated with educational materials for the medical volunteers. "I still can't believe this is really ours," she said to Michael, who was reviewing patient files for their Guatemala mission. "It's not ours," he corrected gently. "It belongs to everyone who needs help. We're just the ones trusted to deliver it." Isabella loved this about Michael: his complete lack of ego, his genuine humility despite his impressive credentials. He'd graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School, completed his residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and could have made millions in private practice. Instead, he'd chosen to work with underserved communities, drawn to pediatric surgery because he believed every child deserved the same quality of care, regardless of their parents' income. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared values rather than the superficial attraction that had blinded Isabella to Alexander's true nature. Michael had first approached her after reading about the Foundation in Medical Journal Today, offering to volunteer his surgical skills for their humanitarian missions. Isabella had been skeptical. Her experience with wealthy, successful men had left her wary of anyone who seemed too good to be true. But Michael had proven himself through actions rather than words. He'd spent weeks in Haiti after Hurricane Maria, performing life-saving surgeries in makeshift operating rooms. He'd worked 18-hour days in Nigeria, training local doctors in advanced pediatric procedures. And he'd done it all while asking for nothing in return except the opportunity to help more children. The couple's love story had become almost as famous as Isabella's legal victory, featured in People magazine as a modern fairy tale, and inspiring a best-selling romance novel loosely based on their lives. But for Isabella, the real fairy tale was much simpler: having a partner who shared her values, supported her mission, and loved Lucas as his own son. Their honeymoon had been spent building a school in rural Honduras. Their first anniversary gift to each other was funding a new wing at the Children's Hospital where Michael had completed his residency. These weren't the traditional markers of romantic love, but for two people who'd found each other through service to others, they were perfect expressions of their bond. Lucas, now walking and beginning to speak in both English and Spanish, had adjusted beautifully to their unconventional lifestyle. He'd visited 12 countries in his first year of life, always carefully protected and supervised, but exposed to the wider world in ways that would shape his character for life. He's going to grow up thinking everyone travels by private jet to help people, Michael laughed, watching Lucas play with a toy airplane. There are worse assumptions for a child to make, Isabella replied. I want him to understand that privilege comes with responsibility, that having resources means using them to lift others up. This philosophy had guided every decision Isabella made with her settlement money. She could have lived a life of luxury, buying mansions and yachts like any other billionaire. Instead, she'd chosen to keep just enough to ensure her family's security and basic comfort, dedicating the rest to the foundation's work. The book Isabella had written about her experience, From Betrayal to Victory, A Mother's Fight for Justice, had become an international bestseller, translated into 30 languages and inspiring women around the world to fight back against powerful abusers. The book tour had taken her to 40 cities, where she'd spoken to packed auditoriums about the importance of never giving up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. The most moving moment of the tour had come in Seattle, where a young woman approached Isabella after her speech with tears in her eyes. My husband is a judge, the woman had whispered. He's been abusing me for years, but no one believes me because he's so respected in the community. Your story gave me hope that I could fight back. Isabella had connected the woman with one of the foundation's legal teams, and 6 months later, the judge had been arrested for domestic violence and judicial misconduct. It was one of hundreds of similar stories, women who'd found the courage to speak out after seeing that justice was possible, even against the most powerful opponents. The ripple effects continued to spread. Universities began teaching Isabella's case in law school ethics courses. Medical schools implemented new protocols for reporting suspicious patterns in patient deaths. And most importantly, the legal precedents established by Marcus's prosecution had made it easier for other victims to seek justice against wealthy abusers. As the jet crossed into Guatemalan airspace, Isabella reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years earlier, she'd been a naive young woman who believed that love and trust were enough to build a life on. The betrayal she'd experienced had nearly destroyed her, but it had also revealed strengths she'd never known she possessed. Are you happy? Michael asked quietly. Noticing her contemplative mood, Isabella considered the question seriously. Happiness seemed like too simple a word for what she felt. She was fulfilled, purposeful, grateful, but also carrying the weight of responsibility that came with her resources and platform. I'm at peace, she said finally. For the first time in my adult life, I know exactly who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. And what's that? Making sure no other woman has to face what I faced alone. Making sure no other child grows up wondering if their father will choose money over love. It was a heavy burden, but one she carried gladly. The foundation now employed over 200 people worldwide, from lawyers and doctors to logistics coordinators and fundraising specialists. They'd helped over 5,000 women escape abusive relationships, provided medical care to 50,000 children in underserved communities, and changed laws in 6 countries to better protect domestic violence victims. The work in Guatemala proved to be both challenging and rewarding. The earthquake had destroyed much of the country's medical infrastructure, leaving thousands of injured people without access to proper care. Isabella's team worked around the clock, with the Gulf Stream making multiple supply runs between Guatemala City and medical distribution centers. Michael performed 43 surgeries in 5 days, saving children who would have died without immediate intervention. Isabella coordinated with local officials to establish temporary clinics and worked with international aid organizations to ensure their efforts complemented rather than duplicated existing relief work. On their last night in Guatemala, Isabella found herself standing outside the field hospital they'd established, watching Michael teach a local doctor how to perform a complex pediatric procedure. Lucas was asleep in her arms, exhausted by the day's activities but safe and loved. A young Guatemalan girl, maybe 7 years old, approached shyly and handed Isabella a drawing she'd made, a picture of the medical team with the words, "Gracias por salvar mi hermano." "Thank you for saving my brother," written in careful block letters. Isabella knelt down to the girl's level, accepting the drawing with genuine gratitude. "De nada, mi amor," she replied. "Your brother is very brave." In that moment, Isabella understood completely why she'd survived Alexander's betrayal and Victoria's murder attempt. It wasn't random luck or divine intervention. It was because she had work to do, people to help, a son to raise with values that would make the world better. The flight home gave Isabella time to work on her second book, a guide for women navigating divorce from wealthy, powerful men. The manuscript was nearly finished, incorporating lessons learned from the thousands of cases her legal aid centers had handled. It would be published by the same house that had made her first book a bestseller, with all proceeds funding expansion of the foundation's services. "What should we call this one?" Michael asked, reading over her shoulder. "I was thinking Never Again, a Practical Guide to Fighting Back," Isabella replied. "Something that makes it clear this isn't just my story. It's a roadmap for anyone facing similar battles." The book would include detailed information about gathering evidence, finding qualified legal representation, protecting children during custody battles, and rebuilding life after escaping an abusive relationship. More importantly, it would include contact information for the Foundation's resources and a network of allied organizations around the world. Isabella had learned that her story was far from unique. Every day brought new cases of wealthy men using their resources to abuse and intimidate their wives, confident that money could buy them immunity from consequences. But the Sterling case had changed that calculus, showing that even billionaires could be held accountable when faced with determined opposition and solid evidence. As they approached New York airspace, Isabella's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Alexander Sterling had died in federal prison, apparently from a heart attack during what inmates described as a disagreement with other prisoners who disapproved of his crimes against women and children. Isabella felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Alexander Sterling had been a chapter in her life that was already finished. His death didn't change the work that needed to be done or the people who still needed help. "How do you feel about it?" Michael asked after she'd shared the news. "I feel sorry for Lucas," Isabella replied honestly. "Someday he'll be old enough to ask about his biological father, and I'll have to explain what kind of man he was. But Alexander stopped being relevant to our lives the day the judge sentenced him." It was true. Isabella had moved so far beyond her life as Alexander's wife that his existence had become irrelevant to her daily reality. She was Dr. Isabella Torres now, director of a foundation that operated in 30 countries, author of best-selling books about justice and resilience, mother to a happy child, and wife to a man who shared her values and supported her mission. The landing at JFK brought Isabella full circle to where her new life had begun. The same tarmac where she'd once boarded Alexander's jet as a naive young wife now welcomed her home as a woman who'd learned to transform pain into purpose. Waiting for them was Dr. Sarah Martinez with an update on their next mission, a child vaccination program in rural Kenya that would serve 10,000 children over 6 weeks. The logistics were complex, requiring coordination with multiple international health organizations and local government officials. But Isabella's foundation had built a reputation for making the impossible happen. "The Kenyan Health Ministry has confirmed all our permits," Sarah reported as they walked toward the terminal. "The vaccination supplies are already en route, and our advance team says the local communities are eager to begin the program." Isabella smiled, already thinking ahead to the challenges and opportunities of the Kenya mission. Each new project brought fresh difficulties, language barriers, cultural differences, political complications, and always the underlying challenge of doing meaningful work with limited time and resources. But she'd learned that impossible was just another word for requires more creativity and determination. The same skills that had helped her survive Alexander's betrayal and build a case against Victoria's murder network now served her in coordinating complex humanitarian missions around the world. Home was a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that Isabella had chosen specifically because it felt like a real family neighborhood rather than a wealthy enclave. The house was comfortable but not ostentatious, with a backyard where Lucas could play safely and a home office where Isabella could work on foundation business without the isolation she'd felt in the Manhattan penthouse. The master bedroom walls were covered with photos from their humanitarian missions, children they'd helped, communities they'd served, and team members who'd become like family. These images told the story of Isabella's real life, the one she'd built from the ashes of her destroyed marriage. Michael's medical journals shared shelf space with Isabella's legal files and foundation reports. Lucas's toys were scattered throughout the house, evidence of a childhood filled with love and security. It was everything the Manhattan penthouse had never been, a home built on genuine affection rather than performance and appearance. That evening, as they settled into their family routine, Isabella received a call that would test everything she'd learned about forgiveness and justice. Victoria Blackwood had died in prison, apparently by suicide, leaving behind a detailed confession that implicated 12 other doctors in similar murder-for-hire schemes. She named names, Marcus explained over the phone. Doctors in Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, even one in London. The FBI thinks this network goes back 20 years and may have killed hundreds of women. Isabella listened to the details with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Victoria's death meant that justice would never be fully served for her crimes, but her confession would help authorities pursue other killers who might have escaped detection for decades. What happens now? Isabella asked. Now we make sure her victims get justice too, Marcus replied. The Foundation's legal teams are already reaching out to families of suspicious medical deaths. This is going to be a massive undertaking, but it could help thousands of people find closure. As Isabella tucked Lucas into bed that night, she thought about the legacy she wanted to leave for her son, not the money or the foundation or the books, but the understanding that every person had the power to choose between self-interest and service to others. Tell me the airplane story, Mama, Lucas requested, his favorite bedtime tale. Isabella settled beside his bed and began the story she'd created about a magical airplane that traveled around the world helping people in need. It was their airplane, of course, but in the story it was piloted by a brave princess who'd learned that real power came from lifting others up rather than putting them down. And the princess lived happily ever after, Lucas asked sleepily. The princess lived purposefully ever after, Isabella corrected gently. She found happiness by helping others find theirs. After Lucas fell asleep, Isabella joined Michael on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the Brooklyn Bridge toward the Manhattan skyline where her old life had played out. The lights of the city twinkled like stars, each one representing someone's hopes and dreams and struggles. Any regrets? Michael asked. Following her gaze, Isabella considered the question seriously. Did she regret the pain she'd endured, the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her, the long fight for justice that had consumed 2 years of her life? No, she said finally. Everything that happened led us here, led us to this work, to each other, to the life we're building for Lucas. I wouldn't change any of it. It was the truth. The naive young woman who'd married Alexander Sterling for love had died in that hospital bed where Victoria had tried to kill her. In her place had emerged someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more capable of making a real difference in the world. 3 years after the trial that had shocked the world, Isabella Torres stood before the United Nations General Assembly, delivering a speech on Justice Without Borders, to representatives from 193 countries. The woman who'd once been too intimidated to speak up at charity luncheons now commanded the attention of world leaders as she outlined her foundation's proposal for an international network of legal aid centers for domestic violence victims. Justice delayed is justice denied, she told the assembly, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. But justice that comes at all, no matter how late, proves that truth is stronger than money, that courage is more powerful than corruption, and that a mother's love can move mountains, even mountains of privilege and power. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Delegates from countries around the world approached afterward, eager to bring the foundation's programs to their own nations. The girl who'd once been impressed by Alexander's wealth now commanded resources that dwarfed his former empire. But more importantly, she commanded respect earned through service rather than inheritance or marriage. Lucas, now 4 years old and fluent in 3 languages from their travels, watched from the gallery as his mother addressed the world. He was too young to understand the politics, but old enough to recognize that Mamai was someone important, someone people listened to when she spoke. After the speech, Isabella's phone buzzed with a message that brought her story full circle. Jessica Wong had discovered evidence of a new network of corrupt professionals, lawyers, doctors, and judges who conspired to help wealthy men eliminate inconvenient family members. The investigation would require years of work and international cooperation, but Isabella's foundation was uniquely positioned to lead the effort. "Are you ready for another fight?" Jessica asked when they spoke later that evening. Isabella looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly, and at Lucas, who was drawing pictures of the United Nations building. She thought about all the women around the world who were living in fear, trapped in abusive marriages by men who believed wealth made them untouchable. "We're ready," she said, because that's what Isabella Torres did now. She fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She'd learned that justice wasn't something that happened to you, but something you made happen through determination, courage, and the refusal to accept that powerful people were above the law. The scared young woman who'd bled alone in a Queen studio apartment was gone forever. In her place stood a warrior who discovered that the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you is to become everything they never expected you could be. And Isabella's story was far from over. Around the world, there were still battles to be fought, victims to be helped, and corrupt networks to be exposed. She had Lucas to raise, Michael to love, and a foundation to grow into something that could change laws and save lives on every continent. The private jet that had once symbolized Alexander Sterling's arrogance now carried hope to the hopeless, medical care to the forgotten, and legal aid to the powerless. It was, Isabella thought, the perfect metaphor for what her life had become, something that had been meant for evil transformed into an instrument of good. Justice had been served, but more importantly, justice would continue to be served, one case at a time, one victim at a time, one victory at a time. And at the center of it all was a woman who learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed.